The city was alive with neon lights, but the street was almost empty. Shadows stretched long between broken lamps, and the air smelled of smoke and rust. The buildings leaned like tired giants, their walls covered with strange alien letters and fading signs. Most people avoided this part of the city because danger lived here, waiting in silence. An elderly alien walked slowly down that street. His back bent, his steps weak, his skin was pale and rough, his eyes tired and his clothes torn. He carried a small bag close to his chest as if it was all he had left in the world. Every step made his breathing heavier, but he kept moving, whispering to himself that he would reach home. But in the silence, other eyes were watching from the shadows. 4 alien thugs stepped out, each bigger and stronger than the old one. Their laughter was low and cruel, echoing against the walls. The leader, with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes, pointed at the old alien. "Well, what do we have here?" "A weak little crawler walking all alone," he said. The others closed in, surrounding the old alien like hunters circling prey. The elderly alien froze, his bag clutched tightly. "Please, leave me alone," he whispered, his voice trembling. The thugs laughed louder. "Leave you alone? Not tonight, old one," the leader growled. They shoved him, making him stumble against the wall, his bag slipping slightly from his grip. "Give us the bag," another thug demanded, his voice cold and greedy. The alien shook his head, fear in his eyes. This is all I have," he pleaded. But his words only fed their hunger. One thug snatched at the bag, but the old alien held it tight, surprising them with his small burst of strength. That resistance made the leader furious. "Stupid old fool," he roared, raising his hand to strike. The street grew colder, the tension sharp. The old alien's heart raced, his breath coming in quick gasps. He knew he could not win. He was too weak, too old, too slow. The thugs stepped closer, ready to beat him, ready to take everything. The city around them stayed silent. No one came to help. No one dared to step forward, but then, from the far end of the street, footsteps echoed, not hurried, not afraid, but steady, strong, and human. A tall figure walked through the misty neon light, his coat dark, his eyes sharp. The human traveler had been passing by, but now he stopped, watching the scene unfold. For a moment he said nothing, only studying the thugs and the frightened alien. The air grew heavy, as if the whole street was holding its breath. The thugs noticed him and sneered. "Look at that," one of them laughed. "A stranger?" "And not even one of us," the leader smirked, flashing his sharp teeth. "Human." He spat the word like poison. "This is not your business, walk away." But the human didn't move. His eyes fell on the old alien, still shaking, still clinging to the bag, and something inside him refused to let this go. The silence grew unbearable. The old alien looked at the human with wide, desperate eyes. The thugs waited, ready to attack if the stranger came closer. The human's voice finally broke the silence. Calm but strong. "Let him go," he said. The words were simple, but the way he spoke them made the air tremble. The thugs burst out laughing. "Let him go? You must be lost, human," the leader mocked. "This is our street, our rules, and you are nothing." But the human did not back away. He took a step forward, his boots echoing on the cracked pavement. His hand stayed near his side, not reaching for a weapon, just steady, unafraid. The old alien gasped softly, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time that night. The leader's laughter died slowly, his red eyes narrowing. "You really want to fight for this weak thing?" he hissed. The human's answer was a single word, spoken like iron. "Yes." The street grew colder. The neon lights flickered, and the crowd that had begun to gather watched in silence. No one had ever stood up against the thugs before. Not here. Not in this forgotten corner of the city. The old alien's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The thugs circled, their muscles tense, their weapons glinting faintly in the dim light. The human stood tall, his shadow stretching across the broken ground. For the first time in a long time, the balance of power in this street had shifted. The fight had not even started, but already, the story of that night had begun. And as the leader raised his hand to signal the attack, the city itself seemed to pause, because everyone knew this was no ordinary night. This was the night when one human would defy the odds, and everything would change. The street was frozen, the neon lights flickering like nervous eyes. The elderly alien still clutched his small bag, his hands shaking, his legs almost giving up. Around him stood the thugs, their sharp teeth flashing, their cruel eyes glowing in the dim mist, and standing at the edge of the circle was the human, silent but unbroken. He had no armor, no weapon, no gang at his back. He was only one man. With steady steps and calm eyes, the thugs laughed at him, their voices bouncing off the walls like broken music. But the laughter did not shake him. It only made him step closer, his boots echoing against the cracked street. "Turn around, human," the leader growled, his voice low and sharp like a blade. "This is not your fight. Walk away before you lose more than you know." But the human didn't listen. He kept walking forward, his eyes never leaving the old alien. The alien's lips trembled as he whispered, Why would you stop for me?" The human didn't answer, not yet. The thugs shifted uneasily, their leader spat on the ground. "You think you can save him? You think you are brave?" The human finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting through the noise like steel. "Not brave," he said, "just not blind." The thug sneered. Confused by his words, the human took another step. Now standing inside their circle, the crowd that had gathered along the edges gasped. No one had ever dared to walk into the thug's space before. The leader laughed again, though his voice carried a strange edge of anger now. "You must have a death wish," he snarled, pulling out a jagged blade that glowed faintly with alien energy. The human's eyes flickered to the weapon, but his face did not change. He stood tall, calm, his hands loose at his sides. The thugs moved closer, trying to box him in, but the human's very presence made their rhythm break. He was not like the others, not afraid, not shaking. The elderly alien whispered desperately, "Please, you cannot fight them. You will die." But the human only glanced at him for a brief moment. In that look was something the old alien had not seen in years. A promise. The human's eyes spoke the words he did not say. "I will not let them take you." The leader raised his blade, pointing it at the human's chest. "Last chance, human," he hissed. "Leave, or I cut you down where you stand." The human finally answered with a single step forward, closing the space between them. His voice was steady, low but filled with force. "Then try." The street grew colder, the crowd silent, every breath heavy. The thugs looked at each other uneasy, their smirks fading little by little. This man, this stranger did not carry fear, and that scared them more than any weapon could. The leader roared and swung his blade. The human moved, not fast like lightning, but precise like water flowing where it must. He caught the thug's wrist with his bare hand, twisting it sharply. The blade clattered to the ground. Sparking against the stone, the crowd gasped. The other thugs stumbled back in shock. No one had ever touched their leader, let alone disarmed him. But the fight had only begun. The second thug lunged, swinging a heavy iron pipe. The human ducked, the pipe slamming into the wall with a thunderous crack. Dust and broken stone rained down. The human countered with a sharp punch to the thug's stomach, sending him gasping to the ground. The crowd cried out in disbelief, their whispers rising like a storm. "Impossible," one alien muttered. "He fights with nothing." And yet they fall. The old alien's eyes widened, his weak body trembling not from fear now but from wonder. He whispered to himself, "A human, fighting for me?" Tears burned his eyes, a feeling he thought long dead stirring inside his heart. The leader recovered his stance, rage boiling in his eyes. "Kill him!" he screamed to the others. Two thugs rushed forward together, one swinging a chain, the other drawing a knife. The human's steps were smooth, his movements sharp. He caught the chain with his forearm, ignoring the pain, yanking the thug off balance. Then he kicked the knife wielder in the chest, sending him stumbling backward. The street echoed with the chaos of the fight, but the human did not falter. The crowd grew louder, whispers turning into gasps. They had never seen such defiance, never seen someone fight the thugs with nothing but will. The elderly alien clutched his bag tighter, his heart pounding as if it wanted to leap from his chest. Hope burned brighter with every strike. With every step the human took for the first time in years, someone stood against the darkness, but the leader was not finished. He snarled, picking up his fallen blade, its edge glowing brighter now with furious energy. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice shaking with rage. The human turned, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, but his eyes still steady. "No," he said softly. "I think this is just the start." The leader screamed and charged. The street filled with his fury, the crowd's breath caught. The old alien's eyes filled with terror and hope all at once, and the human stepped forward again into the storm. The battle for the night had truly begun, and the city itself seemed to lean closer. Watching, waiting for what this one man would do next, the clash of steel and flesh echoed through the silent street. The leader of the thugs swung his glowing blade with fury, his strength like a storm. The human blocked with his arm, the force knocking him back a few steps, pain burning through his body, but he did not fall. He planted his feet firmly on the cracked ground, his eyes refusing to break. The other thugs circled, waiting for their chance to strike. They had seen many fights before, but never like this. This human was different. His movements simple yet sharp, his focus unshaken, but still he was outnumbered, and their weapons gleamed in the neon light. The odds were against him, and everyone watching knew it. The elderly alien pressed against the wall, clutching his bag tight. His chest rose and fell in fear, but also in awe. He whispered to himself, "How long can he stand? He is only one." His old eyes darted between the thugs and the stranger. Every second felt like a blade cutting through the night. The leader roared and swung again, the blade slicing the air with a deadly hum. The human dodged, but the edge still grazed his side, leaving a burning line of pain. Blood stained his shirt, but he only clenched his jaw. Refusing to show weakness, the crowd gasped, whispers racing through them like wildfire. "He is bleeding," one alien murmured. "He cannot last." The second thug lunged with his chain, wrapping it around the human's arm. The iron links bit into his skin, pulling tight. The thug laughed, yanking hard to drag him down, but the human twisted, using the pull to spin. With a fierce kick, he sent the thug crashing into a wall. Breaking the chain loose, the pain was sharp, but the fight burned hotter inside him. Still, the numbers pressed harder. Another thug slashed with a knife, catching the human's shoulder. He staggered, his body screaming, but his eyes never lost their fire. The leader sneered, circling like a predator. "You bleed, human," he growled. "You will break soon." The human breathed heavily, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. His voice came low, steady. "Better to bleed for something than live for nothing." The words struck the crowd, silence rippling for a moment. Even the elderly alien felt a shiver down his spine. It was not just a fight anymore, it was defiance against despair. But the struggle grew worse. The thugs attacked together, fists, blades, and chains flashing. The human fought back with every ounce of strength, blocking, striking, dodging, but he could not stop every blow. A fist smashed into his jaw. A blade scraped across his arm, his knees almost buckled, the taste of iron filling his mouth. The crowd murmured, fear and doubt rising again. "Maybe he cannot win," they whispered. The elderly alien's hands trembled. He wanted to help, but his body was weak, his bones old. All he could do was clutch the bag tighter, whispering prayers to the stars. Yet deep inside, something stirred. Watching this human stand, injured yet unbroken, awoke a memory long buried, a memory of courage, of hope, of days when the galaxy still believed in honor. The leader saw the human falter and grinned cruelly. "This is the end," he snarled, lifting his glowing blade high. The light of the weapon reflected in the human's eyes. For a moment it seemed like defeat was near. But then, the human's hand moved to his side. Reaching beneath his coat, the crowd leaned forward. Their breaths caught. From his coat, the human pulled out a strange, old device. It was small, metallic, its surface scratched and ancient. No one in the crowd recognized it. But the way the thugs froze for a second said enough. They knew, and fear flickered across their faces. "What is that?" one thug hissed, stepping back. The leader growled, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Some human junk, nothing more," he spat. But his voice was not as steady as before. The human gripped the device tightly, his blood dripping over its surface. For a moment it hummed softly, glowing with faint blue light. The crowd whispered, "Human tech." "Old human tech," the leader roared, trying to bury his fear. "Kill him before he uses it," he shouted. The thugs charged again, blades and chains flashing. The human staggered but stood his ground. His hand shook as the device buzzed louder, the blue light growing brighter. The thugs faltered, their attacks slowing. Unsure of what they faced, the elderly alien gasped. His heart racing, he recognized the hum, faint but clear. It was not just human junk. It was something powerful, something rare. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Impossible." How does he carry that? The human's body was bruised and bleeding, his strength almost gone. But in his hand was the promise of something more. The device pulsed, the crowd held its breath. And the thugs, once so fearless, stepped back in hesitation. The struggle had shifted, and the night was no longer theirs. The elderly alien's eyes widened, hope burning brighter than fear. The human had survived the impossible, and now the fight was far from over. What began as a hopeless struggle had become something else. A storm that could change the balance of the street, and maybe more. The neon lights flickered wildly as the device glowed stronger. The thugs growled in frustration, circling but not daring to strike. And the human, battered but unbroken, lifted his head, his voice, though heavy with pain, rang clear. "You wanted a fight," he said. "Now you'll have one." The street trembled with tension, the struggle far from finished. The crowd could feel it. The night was shifting into legend. The street was no longer silent. The glow of the human's strange device had spread through the air like a spark in dry grass. The blue light pulsed faintly, wrapping the fight in a strange aura. The thugs hesitated, their weapons still raised but their eyes uncertain. The human, though bleeding and tired, stood tall, his grip on the device steady. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown larger. Aliens of all shapes and colors pressed against the walls and rooftops, whispering to one another. Some had come only to watch another hopeless victim fall to the thugs, but now their eyes were wide, their voices restless. "Is that human tech?" One asked. "It cannot be. Humans lost most of their machines long ago." Another replied. "But look at him," a third whispered. "He stands even while bleeding." The elderly alien leaned heavily against the wall, his breath uneven. His eyes stayed locked on the stranger who had stepped into the fight. He whispered, half in fear, half in wonder, "Why would a human risk everything? For me?" He had lived long enough to see many species turn their eyes away from the weak, but never had he seen one step forward with nothing but bare hands and courage. The thugs growled, trying to silence the whispers. "Shut up, all of you," the leader roared, waving his glowing blade. But the crowd did not stop. Their murmurs only grew louder. They had never seen the thugs pushed back before, never seen them doubt. The human's defiance had cracked something greater than just a fight. It had cracked the fear that held the people silent. The leader turned back to the human, fury in his eyes. "You think they care about you?" He spat, pointing at the crowd. "They will cheer when you fall. They will forget your name in an hour." But the human's reply came with calm strength. "Maybe, but tonight they will see you can be stopped." The crowd shivered at his words. Hope, fragile and trembling, stirred in their hearts for so long. The thugs had been untouchable, but now, before their very eyes, a lone human had dared to stand and fight. The second thug hissed, gripping his chain tighter. "He is only flesh and blood, he will break," he said, trying to convince himself, but his voice shook. He had never faced an enemy who refused to bow. The third thug glanced nervously at the device glowing in the human's hand. What if that thing works?" he muttered. The leader snarled, striking him with a glare. "Coward! It is just old junk." The human lifted his head, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw their whispers, their hidden hope, and though his body ached and his blood dripped onto the stone, he felt stronger, not because of the device in his hand, but because the people were watching, and for the first time, they believed change was possible. The elderly alien clutched his bag tighter, tears burning his old eyes. He whispered again, "He does not even know me, yet he stands for me." A part of him wanted to step forward to help, but his weak limbs held him back. Still in his chest, a fire long dead flickered back to life. The human's fight was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone watching. Everyone who had lived in fear of these streets. The leader snarled and raised his blade. "Enough whispers, enough games. I will end this now," he roared. He charged forward, the ground trembling under his heavy steps. The human braced himself, lifting the device higher. The blue glow surged. Humming louder, the crowd gasped, their whispers rising into cries. "Look, it's alive! The human's machine is alive." The blade came down with deadly force. The human raised the device, and in a burst of energy, a shockwave pulsed outward. The leader staggered back, his weapon thrown wide. Sparks flying from its edge, the thugs stumbled, their eyes wide with terror. The crowd erupted in gasps, their whispers turning to awe. "Impossible," someone breathed. He stopped him. The elderly alien's hands shook violently. He had heard of such devices, relics from human wars long past, but to see one still work, even in the hands of a single man, felt like witnessing a miracle. The human, though drained, stood unbroken, the device humming softly in his hand. He looked at the leader, his voice low but firm. "You rule with fear," he said. "But fear breaks when someone stands." The crowd fell silent again, but this silence was not fear. It was wonder. Children peeked from behind their parents, their eyes shining. Merchants who had once paid thugs to survive clenched their fists. Even the weakest aliens felt their hearts stir. One act of defiance had become something greater. A spark in the darkness, a whisper of hope. The thugs, once so confident, now looked shaken. Their leader's eyes burned with fury, but deep within them flickered doubt. He growled, pointing his blade again. "This ends with your death, human." But the crowd did not believe his words the way they once did. Their whispers carried stronger now. "If he can fight, maybe we can too. Maybe the thugs are not untouchable. Maybe the night can change." The elderly alien looked at the human once more, and for the first time in many years his voice rose above a whisper. "Stand strong, stranger," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "You are not alone anymore." The human heard him, his jaw tightening, his grip firm on the device. And for the first time that night, he allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. The struggle was far from over, the danger greater than ever. But he was no longer just a man fighting thugs. He had become something else. A symbol, a story, a whisper that would not die. The leader roared again, preparing his final strike. But this time, it was not just the human who stood against him. It was the eyes of the crowd, the hope of the old alien, and the fear breaking inside the thugs. The night had changed, and the whispers would never be silenced again. The night grew heavier, the neon lights flickering as if they too felt the tension. The human stood in the center of the broken street, his body bruised and bleeding, yet his spirit unbroken. The strange device in his hand hummed with soft blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The thugs circled him, their anger sharp but their steps uncertain, and the crowd pressed closer, their whispers rising like a storm that would not fade. The leader spat on the ground, his glowing blade trembling with rage. "You think this toy will save you?" he hissed, pointing at the device. The human did not answer, his silence sharper than words. His eyes stayed fixed on the thugs, his breath steady despite the blood dripping from his side. The crowd watched, waiting, hoping, afraid. The elderly alien pressed his frail body against the wall, clutching his bag to his chest. His voice was weak, but his eyes were alive. He had seen many nights filled with cruelty, but never a night where someone stood for him. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "Do not give up, human, do not fall now." The leader roared, lifting his blade high. "Kill him!" he shouted, and the others obeyed. Two thugs rushed forward at once, one swinging a chain, the other lunging with a knife. The human moved, the device flaring bright. With a sudden spark of energy, the chain clashed against a glowing shield that appeared for only a second. The thug stumbled back, his weapon useless. The knife slashed, grazing the human's arm. But the stranger struck back with a punch that sent the attacker sprawling. The crowd erupted in gasps. They had never seen such a fight, never seen the thugs pushed back. Every strike, every step the human took made their whispers stronger. "He can win," they said. "He is showing us the truth." The leader's fury burned hotter. He lunged forward, his blade striking hard against the device, sparks flying into the air. The human staggered, pain shooting through his body. But he held firm. The device glowed brighter, the hum turning into a sharp vibration. Then, with a burst of light, a shockwave exploded outward. The leader was thrown back, crashing against the wall with a growl of rage. The thugs froze, staring at the human in disbelief. The crowd roared with cries of awe. "What is that machine?" One alien shouted. "Old human power," another whispered. But the elderly alien shook his head, his voice trembling. "No, it is not just the machine. It is him." The human swayed, his strength nearly gone. The device in his hand dimmed, its light fading slowly. He knew he could not call on it again so easily. But he also knew something else. The fear in the thug's eyes was real. For the first time, they doubted themselves. The second thug growled, his voice shaking. "He bleeds, he is weak, finish him now." But the leader did not move, his red eyes locked on the human with something close to fear. The silence between them was louder than the crowd. The human broke it with a calm voice. "You rule this street because no one stands against you," he said. "But tonight you are not the only one standing." The crowd erupted, their whispers turning into shouts. "Yes," they cried, "yes, stand." The elderly alien trembled, his lips parting, and for the first time in years he raised his voice. "He is right," he shouted, his voice weak but clear. The crowd turned to him, and in his frail hands they saw courage. "If one human can fight, so can we," he said. The thugs snarled, their hold on fear slipping. The leader shouted, "Silence!" But the crowd did not obey. Their whispers had become roars. The people who once hid in shadows now clenched their fists. The balance of the street had shifted. The leader, desperate to reclaim control, lifted his blade again. This time its glow burned brighter than before. He poured all his fury into it, the weapon humming with deadly energy. The crowd fell silent, their hearts pounding. The elderly alien gasped, his old voice breaking. "He will kill him." The human's body ached, his vision blurred, but his resolve stood firm. He gripped the fading device tightly, though he knew it might fail him. His eyes met the leader's, and in that moment, he knew the fight was not just for himself. It was for the old alien, for the crowd, for every silent voice that wanted to rise. His voice cut through the night, steady and sharp. "If I fall, another will rise. You cannot stop what has begun." The leader screamed and charged, his blade glowing like fire. The human braced himself, his hand trembling over the device. The crowd's breath caught, their hearts beating as one. The elderly alien pressed forward, his weak body shaking but his spirit alive. For the first time he lifted a stone from the ground. With all the strength he had left, he hurled it. The stone struck the leader's arm, throwing his aim off. The blade missed its mark, slicing the air instead of flesh. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices thunderous. The leader staggered, enraged. The human saw his chance. With a surge of will, he struck, the device flaring one last time. The blast of energy lit up the street, the leader thrown to the ground, his blade clattering away. The thugs froze, their confidence shattered. The crowd roared, their fear breaking into fire. The elderly alien fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He whispered, "The turning point. It is here." The human stood over the fallen leader, bleeding, broken but victorious in spirit. The night had changed, the rules of the street rewritten. The crowd no longer whispered. They shouted. And for the first time, the thugs looked small. The human raised his head, his voice heavy but strong. "This fight is not mine alone. It is yours." And the crowd, no longer afraid, answered with a roar that shook the night. The turning point had come, and nothing would ever be the same again. The street burned with noise, the crowd shouting louder than ever before. The human stood in the middle of it all, his body torn and bruised, his shirt stained with blood. But his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried him this far. The leader of the thugs lay on the ground, his blade out of reach, his pride shattered, and yet the fight was not over, not while his gang still stood. The other thugs looked at one another, their faces pale with fear. For the first time they saw their leader beaten, but fear turned quickly to rage. "We end him now!" one of them shouted, gripping his chain tight. Another raised his knife, his voice trembling but filled with fury. "Kill the human before the crowd rises further." The human shifted his stance, his legs weak, his arm heavy. The strange device in his hand flickered faintly, the glow nearly gone. It had given him strength, but now it was fading, and he knew he could not rely on it again. All he had left was himself. The elderly alien, still kneeling near the wall, cried out, "No! Leave him!" His frail voice cracked in the air, but the crowd picked it up. "Stand strong, human," they shouted. "You are not alone." The thugs growled, their anger rising as the crowd's courage grew. "You fools," the second thug hissed. "You think he is your savior? He will die, and so will your hope." But the human's voice cut through their threats, calm but powerful. "If hope dies with me," he said, "then let me be the last to fall." The words struck deep, echoing in every chest that heard them. Even the weakest in the crowd felt their fists clench. Their hearts beat harder. The human raised his chin, his voice carrying strength far greater than his broken body. "You rule with fear," he said. "But fear ends when someone refuses to bow." The thugs roared and charged together, the chain whipped through the air, the knife gleamed under neon light. Fists flew like hammers. The human blocked one, dodged another, his body screaming in pain with every move. The chain wrapped around his leg, yanking him down. The knife slashed across his chest, a hot line of fire searing his skin. He fell to one knee, blood dripping onto the broken stone. The crowd gasped, silence crashing down for a moment. "He cannot take more," someone whispered. The elderly alien trembled, his hands reaching out though he had no strength to help. His heart ached, his tears falling, but still the human pushed himself up, his arms shaking, his body refusing to stay down. Slowly, painfully, he stood again. The crowd erupted, their voices breaking through the silence. "And stand! Stand!" they shouted. The thugs looked around, shaken by the roar of voices. Never before had the people dared to defy them. The human, swaying but standing, had turned silence into thunder. The second thug swung the chain again, but the human caught it with his bleeding hand. He pulled with all his strength, dragging the thug off balance with a sharp kick. He sent him crashing into the ground. The knife wielder slashed, but the human twisted, the blade grazing his side. He grabbed the thug's wrist, twisted hard, and the knife clattered away. The thug screamed as the human drove his fist into his jaw, sending him sprawling. The crowd roared louder, their courage breaking free like floodwaters. Even the elderly alien raised his voice again. "Do not stop," he cried, his old voice shaking with power. The human turned his head slightly, his eyes finding the alien, and in that look, they both understood. This fight was more than survival, it was a promise, but the third thug, larger than the rest, let out a furious howl. He charged, tackling the human to the ground. The two struggled in the dirt, fists slamming, blood mixing on the stones. The thug's weight pressed heavy, crushing. The human gasped, his lungs burning, his body screaming for air. The thug raised his fist, ready to crush his skull. The elderly alien cried out, "No!" With all the strength left in his frail frame, he stumbled forward. He grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the ground and swung weakly. The strike barely grazed the thug's back, but it was enough to distract him. The human seized the moment, twisting free. He slammed his elbow into the thug's face, then drove his knee into his chest. The giant thug crashed backward. Gasping in pain, the crowd exploded with cheers. They no longer whispered, they shouted with fire, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" The thugs looked around, their confidence shattered. Their leader groaned on the ground. Watching his power slip away, his empire of fear was crumbling. And one human, bleeding but unbroken, had brought it down. The human stood again, his chest heaving, his body barely holding together. But his voice was steady, his eyes fierce. "You can strike me down," he said, "but you cannot strike down what has begun." The crowd thundered in agreement, their voices shaking the night. The thugs stepped back, their fear now clear. The elderly alien, tears falling down his wrinkled face, whispered, "This is not just defiance. This is a new beginning." He clutched his bag tightly, but his heart was open. For the first time in his long life, he saw the impossible made real. A human against all odds had stood for him. And now the entire street stood with that human, the leader, still on the ground. Growled weakly, "This is not over," he hissed. But his voice no longer carried the weight of fear. The people no longer bowed, no longer hid. The human had broken the chains of silence. The night trembled with energy, the fight not yet finished. But one truth was clear, defiance had risen, and no force could put it back in chains. The street was shaking with voices. What once had been silent and filled with fear was now alive with fire. The people shouted, their voices like a storm breaking chains. The thugs stood frozen, their courage draining away, and in the middle of it all stood the human, broken in body but unbroken in spirit. Blood dripped down his arm, his chest rose and fell heavily. but his eyes burned with the same fierce light that had carried him through every strike. The strange device in his hand flickered weakly, its blue glow almost gone, yet even without its power, he stood taller than the shadows around him. The leader of the thugs dragged himself up from the ground. His glowing blade lay a few feet away, sparks hissing softly against the stone. His red eyes were filled with rage, but behind that rage hid something new, fear. He looked at the human and snarled, his voice hoarse. You think you've won?" The human's voice came steady though his body trembled. "I don't think," he said. "I know," the crowd roared, their cheers shaking the night. The leader's face twisted, his pride breaking under the weight of that sound. All his life he had ruled with silence and fear, but tonight the silence had shattered, and the fear had turned against him. With a furious cry, the leader lunged. Diving for his blade, the human staggered forward too, his legs heavy, his wounds burning. The two reached the weapon almost at the same time. The leader's hand wrapped around the hilt, lifting it with a roar, but the human seized his wrist, forcing the blade upward. The neon light reflected off their faces, one twisted in rage, the other calm in defiance. The struggle shook the street. The leader pressed down with all his strength. The blade edged closer to the human's chest, its glow bright and deadly. The crowd gasped, their hearts frozen. The elderly alien stumbled forward, his weak voice crying out, "No, you will not take him." The sound of that frail but fearless voice gave the human new strength. With a sudden surge, he twisted the leader's arm. Forcing the blade away, the leader screamed, but the sound was cut short as the human drove his fist into his jaw. The blade clattered to the ground, its light fading. The leader fell with it. Collapsing onto the stone, beaten at last, the crowd exploded, their voices echoing through every corner of the city. The thugs, now pale and shaking, looked around. Their power was gone, their leader broken. The people no longer feared them, and without fear, they were nothing. One by one, the thugs fled into the shadows. The crowd roared louder with every step they took. The rule of terror had ended. The elderly alien fell to his knees, tears flowing freely. He clutched his bag tight but looked up at the human with eyes full of gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You saved all of us," the human, breathing heavily, shook his head slowly. "I stood," he said softly, "but you believed." The old alien's chest ached with emotion. For so long he had lived in silence, but tonight he had raised his voice, and he realized the human was right. It was not just one man's fight. It was theirs. The crowd pressed forward, their faces lit with awe and hope. They looked at the human as if he were more than flesh and blood, a symbol, a spark, a story they would carry beyond this night. Children's eyes shone with wonder, merchants clenched their fists with pride, and the weakest among them felt strength stir in their hearts. The human swayed, his body ready to collapse. The elderly alien rushed to him, holding his arm with trembling hands. "You cannot fall now," he said, his voice breaking. "You are our light." The human gave him a faint smile, weary but warm. "I am only a man," he whispered. "But sometimes one man is enough to show the way." The device in his hand gave a final flicker, then went dark, its glow gone, but its memory alive. For the people had seen what mattered. Not the machine, not the weapon, but the will of a human who stood when no one else dared. The leader groaned weakly on the ground, but no one went to help him. No one feared him anymore. The people turned their backs on him, their eyes fixed on the future. A future born from one night, one fight, one defiance. The elderly alien lifted his face to the stars, his heart heavy with joy. He whispered, "The galaxy will remember this." And deep inside, he knew the story would spread, not just of a human who saved an old alien, but of a human who defied the odds and gave hope to the forgotten. The crowd began to chant, their voices one, "Human, human, human." The sound rolled through the streets, no longer whispers, no longer silence, but a roar that would echo across the city. Across the stars the human stood, battered but unbroken, and though he said nothing, his silence was louder than any cry because tonight the people had learned the truth. Fear could rule only if they allowed it. But hope once lit could not be extinguished. The elderly alien held the human's arm as they stood together, one frail and weak, the other scarred and bleeding, yet both united in something greater, a victory not just of fists but of courage. And as the night slowly gave way to dawn, the legend was born. The story of the night when an elderly alien was attacked by thugs, but a human against all odds stood up, and the galaxy would never forget.